read JFK's intended speech. We in this country, in this generation, are by destiny rather than choice the watchmen on the walls of world freedom. Was he rehearsing it, perhaps, as the motorcade reached the plaza?
Welcome, wenchmen, to the thrift store. It is Saturday night. It is Watchmen Decoded. Thanks to the 7 of you that made it relatively on time, and welcome to you, able-bodied. Welcome, able-bodied. Hi, you all finally made it to another live show. I do watch replays. Well, that is good to know. I'm glad you do watch replays. They are not always exactly the same experience as watching them with the crew and live, I guess, but I'm pleased to hear that you are watching the replays, and hopefully you are enjoying the new improved live show look to TSP TV. We've got Kaz and we've also got Baby Pamplin watching. It says there's 7, so I guess we've got some silent viewers. Where's our little Cajun agent and Cali Ninja? 6 now. Someone ran away. So there you go. I'm not sure how many times I have told viewers that do tune in. We do start at 9 p.m. Eastern each and every night between Wednesday and Sunday. And here we are at Saturday already as the first part of the week comes to the end. And it is the first week of a new year for TSP TV, as it seems almost a lifetime ago that we were celebrating our 2-year anniversary and 2 weeks of tea, where we did put together 14 nights of presentations and entertainment for your viewing pleasure and informative purposes. So glad to see that at least a few of you are eager to see what I've got to say and turn up on time, but I do appreciate it. It is Saturday night. Some of you guys may or may not have family obligations or other sort of Saturday night activities that may or may not be more important than tune in. So let's get rid of the thumbnail and the camera on, and we can say a warm welcome and a hello in person. Hold on, what's going on here? Welcome. You're off to go to work, I'm guessing, Kaz, and I just realized we haven't got the little thrift fam fireplace. There it is, and the OG packet of noodles from my first ever video still there. Not sure how edible they are. I've actually taped them up a little bit, but welcome guys, to those of you who have tuned in. It is Saturday night, as I said, so God, don't have a bad day. Sorry to hear that, Kaz, that you're off to work, but we have had your pleasure of your company for the last couple of days, and special props to you, Kaz, because although you do work early shifts, unlike the North American audience that do tune in more regularly, we've got more North Americans than overseas viewers, you're getting up in the wee early hours of the morning, and it's already tomorrow. It's Sunday where Kaz is, so let us know what the lottery numbers are and who won this night's Jays. Sorry, the camera wasn't lined up very well. The Jays, they're not even playing, so forget about that. But anyway, have a good day at work, guys. But we're already at Saturday night. It seemed at one point in this week I was way ahead of the game, a little bit like the tortoise in the hare, as I have mentioned a couple of times in these streams, particularly yesterday, that sometimes you get too far ahead of yourself, and then before you know it, you are behind. And again, this was one of those incidents like today, where I even woke up this afternoon for, oh my God, 9 hours, plenty of time. Before I knew it, I was down to 3 hours and still only had about half of the content I did want to put into the presentation. But then I do suddenly realize in the after fact, and just prior to going on air, that we're live. I don't necessarily need to put everything into the presentation, just give you part of the presentation. We could possibly find a way to orchestrate the stuff that doesn't get in to the presentation with the live experience. But we are going to be bringing you a little look and a deeper delve and dive into the Watchmen, a piece of literature I have mentioned many times on this station. It's not a station yet. It's a YouTube channel, but I have mentioned the Watchmen many times. You can see there is my Rorschach mask. There is my V for Vendetta mask. I also do have a copy of V for Vendetta, but foolishly let my Watchmen to a girl who said she was going to read it. Never saw her again, and I'm pretty sure she never ever read it. But as I said, guys, the Watchmen is something I've mentioned many times before, and I've tried to introduce it to you for your own personal interest, maybe enjoyment, something to do with an evening. Sit back and you can either read The Watchmen, or there is a playlist for the motion comic on YouTube that you can watch. It's about 6 hours long, but it is mesmerizing. But we are going to have a little look into the Watchmen today, and in particularly some sort of contrasts from the fiction in regards to reality, and that is what the decoding fiction is all about. And as it is one of my favorite, if not my favorite, comic book stories of all time, a little bit of knowing me, knowing T rather, knowing you, I like to bring to you some of the things that have influenced me, and a little bit of these presentations that Able Body just said is enjoying, and I have good presentations. Thank you, glad to hear that. Actually great presentations, so that is always good to hear. Thank you for that compliment, Able Bodied, and it does make my efforts feel that little bit more worth the while to know that they are appreciated. But as I said, The Watchmen is something that I have mentioned many times before, and there are some very interesting stories and plots within The Watchmen in regards to reality, although it was set in an alternative 1985, and the apocalypse humanity was facing at the time was a nuclear Armageddon. The Soviets and the United States were in conflict in the Gulf War, Cold War rather, and the world was gonna shit. The doomsday clock was reached 1 minute to midnight, which the doomsday clock was something that was a countdown to nuclear Armageddon. Don't know whatever happened to the doomsday clock, but civil unrest, a little bit of fear and stuff broke out amongst society, and everyone was sort of waiting for the big bang to wipe everybody out. And in the midst of all this, a tycoon, a little bit of a sort of representation of the elites, formulated and come up with a plan to bring order from chaos by staging an alien event. Now, at the beginning of this week, we started with Alien Agenda, so I do try to theme a little bit of these presentations throughout the week together a little bit. And we also looked at Project Purple Haze, where we did kind of look at the possibility that maybe they are sort of somehow filtering or adding a sort of filter to real to our atmosphere to sort of get a real 3D effect. And is this part and parcel of Project Bluebeam, something that I have talked an awful lot about and have an awful lot of content and a few presentations. Actually, some of my early attempts at editing were on Project Bluebeam related content. But Project Bluebeam, the staged alien invasion, all of this kind of stems really from me, from The Watchmen. And as a kid growing up, it was sort of movies, Close Encounters and ET that we talked about in the Alien Agenda that opened my eyes to the prospect of governmental cover-ups in terms of UFO extraterrestrial activities, visitations, possible invasions, right? But it was The Watchmen that did have a UFO themed storyline in this particular instance. It is spoiler alert, and if you've paid attention to TSP TV in the last 2 years, you will know by now that The Watchmen does contain a similar Project Bluebeam scenario, staged hoaxed alien invasion using electromagnetic weaponry, mind control, psionic weapons, all this sort of stuff that may be going on at CERN and HARP, and may be part of what is being rolled out as 5G. This might also be why we're seeing so many satellites being zoomed up into our atmosphere, courtesy of good old Elon Musk. So is anyone still paying attention? I notice the comments have gone a little bit silent there, or maybe you are just on the edge of your seats paying attention. But in the times of COVIDian era, we've seen an awful increase in the number of UFO sightings. There doesn't seem to be a week go by where there isn't some related incident that is from outer space, be it an asteroid, some kind of UFO thing, something discovered, stars in alignment, cosmic events, stuff like that. Kali Ninja, welcome. Glad to see you here. So, wonder what has happened to our little Cajun agent. She is always usually first through the thrift store doors and waiting eagerly to agree and share with everything I have to say. Bless her. But maybe she's having a little bit of a Saturday night get together with friends and family. And if she has, good for her. And thank you that able bodied is listening closely. Now, as again, when it does come to the Watchmen, it's something that has been a big part of my life for probably nearly 30 years, come to think of it, which is quite a staggering amount of time to have had. When I think I'm getting old now, but it has been with me since I was a teenager, and it has played an awful large part in some of my researching into things like Project Bluebeam and the goings on of the shadow governments, and in particular members of the militarized industrial complex, which are made up and owned by a bunch of elites. And he's like, they're kind of money laundering and project think tanks that they can kind of use in public sight, but for nefarious reasons. Cajun agent been active all day today. Good to hear that. Active doing what? Who knows? Welcome. All is welcome to my channel too. Boho's Info. Welcome to you. Thanks for the invite, and thanks for stopping by. If you're not gonna, if or not you are gonna stay tuned, or you just pop by to give us that little bit of info or not, we will see, I guess, as we progress. But as I said, back to the Watchmen, it has been a big part of my life. It does contain an awful lot of relevance to sort of shadow governments going on and how sort of people can manipulate and orchestrate and eventually stage events if they have the finances, resources, means, and desire to do so. Order out of chaos. And is this whole COVIDian pandemic part of the psyop, the mind control, the mass manipulation, the divider, the contract, the perpetual fear? A little bit like back in the 1980s. I grew up in the 80s, almost shit scared to wake up every morning because I thought at any given moment a nuclear bomb could fucking go off and we'd have 4-minute warnings. Remember Frankie Goes to Hollywood? That classic 80s tune there. Good job, Kali Ninja. I'm guessing we just had somebody who wanted to tell us he had a channel, but thanks for that brief intro in message, Boho. Glad you stopped by. Made a world of difference to everything, I'm sure. But as I said, we are going to be looking at the Watchmen shortly, and we do got our double digits already. So oh, you're here. Okay, well, you're still there. Thank you. I didn't know. Sometimes we do occasionally get trolls and people that wander by and sort of just have their thing to stay in on, really sort of contributing or want to be part of what is going on. So if you are here to enjoy, enjoy and welcome. But if not, I don't know. But we'll check you out later if you are a legit non-troll. And if that is offensive, I'm sorry, I don't mean to, but it does happen from time to time. You can be aware, and maybe it's happened to you. So Alan Moore, the Watchman, somebody, as again, he also wrote V for Vendetta. Another, I did sort of have intentions to bring you a double bill and look at both of them, but I did realize that maybe we can do a whole presentation on V for Vendetta. And Alan Moore is a very, very interesting individual in his own right. He could have a show. And he's written some other pieces of literature in the comic book world, the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, that you may or may not have be familiar with a movie that was out a little while ago. He wrote that. He also worked on some of the comics that DC were promoting back in the 80s, or publishing rather in the 80s, Swamp Thing. And he also worked for a little while on Batman, and is a little bit sort of dark, deep, mysterious, and does take sort of comic books to a little bit of a realm of depth and intelligence that may not be in some of the more sort of kiddie generated sort of Spider-Man-y Fantastic Four type titles. But believe it or not, a lot of these comic books, although they are designed for kids, a lot of the science fiction in it is indeed based on certain science fact or experimentational knowledge. And nearly all of the superheroes of some sort of other have been given their abilities as a result of some kind of freak accident, sometimes in the case of the Hulk, he was a scientist on a secret nuclear research facility when a gamma bomb blew up and the gamma rays bombarded Bruce Banner and then give him the ability to turn into the Hulk. And a little bit what we see also in the Watchmen is a nuclear accident gone wrong that give a particular scientist the ability and the powers of Dr. Manhattan, somebody that is, or a being rather, that has the power and ability of God, and somebody who lives in all moments of time at any given moment. And this is a little bit very similar to Looking Glass, the project Looking Glass, and the Looking Glass technology that we are going to delve into as part of the presentation. We've got a little piece that will explain that a little bit better than me, hopefully, but we'll talk about that more afterwards. And here he is, Devil Speak. Glad to see you here. So no offense, Boho, I hope you realize, as I said, sometimes that does happen when people come in and don't sort of say hello or anything like that. But if you are genuinely here, then welcome to the crew, and hope you make yourself comfortable. But Devil, it was you, I think, that talked about Looking Glass technology, or Project Looking Glass, and we will be featuring very briefly in the presentation that I do have planned for you on the Watchmen, an individual that will touch on this, being able to see in any given moment, at any from any time frame. At the same time, was something also that Tesla spoke about in his time traveling experimentation. Something we covered in the time travel trilogy was that he said he experienced all moments of time at the same time, past, present, and future. And is this technology, or has that technology been in the hands of a certain amount of elites for longer than we realize? Is some of this technology being used against us? Is this clandestine covert industries that like present, pharmaceuticals or high-tech gadgetry, are they little more than divisions of military and weaponized technology that is not branded as militarized, but branded as personal assistance or help in life? And this is how they kind of are presenting the cure to COVID. It's just for your safety. We've got to keep you safe. Stay 6 feet apart. It is for your safety. So not something that you hear an awful lot of in the Watchmen, being about your safety, but it is for a safe and secure society that the staged alien event did take place in that piece of fiction. And are the elites going to be using a false flag staged event, psychological operation involving a hoax alien event on humanity in order to usher in their one world order? And then we will have a safe and secure society for all. And once we can put aside our personal differences in squabblings in an interglobal level, we will concentrate our efforts on possibly a falsified threat from out of this world. And that is something I have for a long time, certainly in the aftermath of that September Tuesday in 2001 we all remember so well. Fuck me, they're going to bring in the big one sooner or later, and that event was nearly 20 years ago. So we are kind of due a big bang of the psychological operation nature at some point in the future. So as I said, guys, we've got a little bit, it's a shorter presentation than I planned, but as I said, I did want it to be an awful lot longer, but I do also sometimes need to realize that this is a live show, so not everything that makes it into the presentation we can somehow put it into the show. And also furthermore, it can be future content, sequels, follow-ups, deleted scenes, extras, what was on the cutting scene, on the cutting room floor, that kind of stuff. So if or not, I'm sure many of you are unfamiliar with Alan Moore, and maybe the only sort of form of knowledge that you have on the Watchmen is what I have told you in snippets. Now, if the Cajun agent was here, she was supposed to be doing a bit of binge watching and told me she was going to do some last night. But maybe, hopefully, after tonight's presentation, and as I said, you can watch the motion comic in its entirety as it was from the pages on YouTube, free of charge. You don't need Hulu or Amazon or Netflix or anything like that. And if there was a way that I could do it without copyright strikes, I'd like to sort of do a sort of movie night where we could watch it together. But I'm pretty sure on YouTube or Facebook that would get shut down due to copyright reasons. Maybe we could get away with it on Twitch. But that would be a fun thing to do, a little bit like, what was that show, Mystery Science Theater, with the two puppets and the guy that used to watch the sci-fi movies and then talk about it. Something like that in mind, but maybe future aspirations are there. But still, The Watchmen is something that I do encourage you to watch, because it does give you kind of an understanding, and not just about alien staged invasions, but a little bit about how sort of society can be controlled, and certainly sort of some of the goings on that may or may not happen at some of these nuclear power plants or places that sort of present themselves as energy or scientific research agencies, are actually really, you know, dabbling in some very weird and wonderful things. And something also we covered as part of 2 weeks of tea was real life Stranger Things Project Montauk, which was one of the more interesting and fun shows, and probably in my top 5 presentations. I think that was a real fun and interesting show. So much going on at Montauk that could be a channel all of its own, the Montauk stories, and that was what did inspire Stranger Things. And again, some of the sort of realms of Stranger Things we looked at Montauk do have a little bit of reality influence in them, whether or not it is real in its entirety, but there is some real life influence in origins for these science fiction publications or presentations or movies and stuff like that. They seem to be theming a very lot of similar content in the last few years. Stranger Things again opened up portals and dimensions and monsters. During the Purple Haze, we looked at quite a lot of recent movies in the last 6 months to a year that have come out that all feature interdimensional portals, monsters, purpled one-eyed creatures, brainwashing, mind control, altered realities, simulated realities, and all of these movies are kind of targeted as kids. So are they kind of programming the next generation, again with Monarch programming, that we retain information within our DNA and we can pass it down? And this is really, back to the Tavistock stuff, mass manipulation, behavioral patterns of society using Monarch. Program this generation, so maybe 2 or 3 generations down the road, they will be only too willing to accept whatever government is regurgitating as the official narrative at the time. And maybe that is how they are going to usher in and get the future generations to accept the one world order, and eventually maybe leave us to a Logan's Run kind of environment, in domed environments where we can only live to 30 and we are bred in laboratories. Sorry, what are we saying there, Bohos? Question, aren't you looking at pre-programming on movies? Well, programming is programming. It is not just necessarily predictive programming, Bohos, in the sense of like the Watchmen here, that we're going to look at some of the things that exist within the realms of the fiction Watchmen that actually exist and could well be things that are of a threat to humanity in the real life, or at least they're things that there are evidence and articles of research into the realms of the fiction. But beyond that, TV programs, life mimics art. A lot of TV shows not just, contain dark, deep secrets. Some of them just teach people how to behave. And something I sort of mentioned in the past is Friends, that, before Friends, people didn't really used to hang out very much in coffee shops. But around the sort of time that Friends was a very popular show, Starbucks sort of come along and started populating high streets in shopping malls around the globe. And all of a sudden, people started hanging out in Starbucks, acting like they're Chandler Ross in the gang. Excuse me, I need some water. Got me a mason jar today. And that is reference to the original Night Owl in The Watchmen, Hollis Mason. I read Logan's Run when I was very young. Yeah, Logan's Run Soylent Green, Logan's Run, and The Watchmen, for me, are possibly out of my, I grew up reading comic books in adult life. I worked and managed a comic book shop in my hometown. Spent a lot of time watching sci-fi and stuff, and things like Logan's Run, Planet of the Apes, Soylent Green, and The Watchmen that we're going to see. They're all sort of been part of my life. Back to the Future, all these kind of Terminator movies that were all part of 80s pop culture. These are sort of ingrained and inbred in me, and as a geek, I tend to pay closer attention than the casual viewer to these sort of movies and search for Easter eggs and references to maybe geekdom, but there are a lot of secrets contained within movies, and in particular, it seems at the moment an awful lot of them are being sort of snuck into like preteen target audience movies and entertainment. Like I said, there's quite a few movies: Loving Monsters, A Babysitter's Guide to Monster Hunting. There's another one, I can't remember what it's called, The Monster Squad, and one we looked at on Thursday night, Scary Stories, the Cranston University, and Cranston University could well be a Tavistock reference. So fiction, that's why, I don't call it predictive programming, because decoding fiction isn't just about predictive programming, although fiction does contain predictive programming in it. Within it, it also has a lot of hidden messages, and a little bit like the Da Vinci Code, if you remember that book by Dan Brown. The contemporaries of the time, like Leonardo da Vinci, used to hide secrets in his paintings, and that was what it was all about: cracking and following the clues hidden within contemporary artists of the time. And remember, back then, they didn't have movies; they just had paintings in like Beethoven playing music and stuff. They didn't have TV or any of that kind of stuff. So this is how hidden messages were kind of sent out. And in contemporary modern day times, artists now don't just have canvas to paint on. They have silk screen, they have digital platforms, they have movies, they have comic books, they have literature, all sorts of things. So I kind of do believe that some of our contemporary artists and writers, authors, stuff like this are kind of putting some subliminal messages in. And there is a little trace of clues within The Watchmen that we will look at after, as part of what I did want to sort of put into the presentation that couldn't. But this is some other pieces of fiction that Watchmen took influence from, that also depicts a staged alien invention. I was young once, not really. No, I think you were old. Devil speak, but Logan's Run is something I am planning to do similar to this with in the not so distant future, because it is a little bit relevant. It has the chip and pin, as well as depopulation and population control, and stay inside the dome for your own safety. But we are at the 30-minute mark, so that is about time, or good enough time as any, I guess, to get the presentation up. So it's only an hour 20 minutes, and that is because I sort of did run out of time a little bit today, unfortunately. Thought I had all the time in the world, and I didn't. Oh for looking glass technology, huh? Devil speak. But anyway, guys, you've got about an hour and 20 minutes to enjoy. It's not all me talking. There's a lot to listen to and watch as well. So hopefully this will give you a little bit more of an eye-opener and insight into Alan Moore's The Watchmen. And hopefully some of you guys might even want to go out and watch it, so we can talk about it more, maybe in an Alan Moore Watchmen revisited, or maybe a Morwellian. Because don't forget, we've got V for Vendetta to throw in the mix. We could have a whole night talking about Morwellian dystopias. But as I said, guys, this is Watchmen Decoded. Hope you enjoy.
September 2nd. That's unusual. I'd expected us to reappear on Earth much earlier. The static interference I noticed earlier makes everything so unpredictable. Obviously, it wasn't caused by a warhead detonation. What then? Not tachyons, surely. Yes, definitely. A squall of tachyons. Where can they be coming from? I'd almost forgotten the excitement of not knowing, the delights of uncertainty. Safe. How can anyone protect themselves against a world where this happens? Tachyon particles traveling backwards in time occur rarely. Someone must be generating them. If I probe far enough, I should stumble upon the source of the disturbance, though this static makes scanning difficult. Also, there's apparently more than one generator. Most are faint, but a pulse from the southern polar region is strong. Logically, we should investigate the Antarctic signal immediately, assess its connection with this catastrophe. Take Cat away, Vite. Take Cat away and face me. Adrian, I'm sorry. I don't buy this hoax invasion story. Come on. What are you really up to? Very well. Once more. I engineered a monster, cloned its brain from a human psychic, sent it to New York, and killed half of the city. Adrian, that's bullshit. Nobody could do that. You're being... He did it. Half New York. Fight. Get rid of Cat. Rorschach, his story. It's full of holes. Adrian, your assassination attempt. What if he'd shot you first instead of your secretary? You couldn't really do that. You wouldn't kill half New York. You couldn't. I could. I did. If you like, I'll tell you how. The psychic was the key. Poor young Robert Deschaines. I acquired his brain after death, and my geneticists cloned something much bigger and more powerful from it, incorporating it into my creature. The brain was a psychic resonator. It would amplify a signal pulse and broadcast it. The signal triggered by the onset of death. We coded a lot of information into the signal. Terrible information.
It was so easy to have an effect because the majority of the writers and artists who'd come before us had never thought of challenging any of these assumptions regarding the superhero genre. They had thought that perhaps at best it might be a cynical joke about superheroes, but yes, there is that quality in stuff like Watchmen. There is that element of, wouldn't these characters be a joke if they were in the real world? But there's also a poignance to the characters. Wouldn't these characters be somehow kind of sad and touching in the real world? And there's no reason why we can't exploit all of these things. When you look at these familiar characters, from a new perspective, you can suddenly see things that have actually been true about the characters right from their very inception in the late 30s. But nobody had applied a political interpretation to them or a sexual interpretation. Well, what Watchmen became was entirely a meditation about power. We were thinking about how each of these characters, to some degree, represented different sorts of power. We had the global situation unwinding and unfolding behind them, where you'd got different sorts of superpowers at odds with each other. An escalating situation in Afghanistan, and various other bits of bad world news that suggest that the nuclear doomsday clock is getting closer to the midnight mark. To some degree, if you're talking about superheroes, it's very likely to become a meditation upon power. You find that Yes, superheroes in the real world are kind of funny. They're also kind of scary because actually a person dressing in a mask and going around beating up criminals is a vigilante psychopath. That's what Batman is, in essence. And we came up with the character of Rorschach as a way of exploring what that Batman-type driven, vengeance-fueled vigilante would be like in the real world. And the short answer is a nutcase. I mean, it wasn't until halfway through that we realised that Rorschach would not survive the book. It just became obvious. We realised that this was a character, if ever there was a character, who'd got a king-size death wish. He was in pain, psychological pain, every moment of his life, and he wanted out of it, but with honour, in whatever his own twisted standards of honour might have been.
Rorschach's Journal, October 16th, 1985. 42nd Street, women's breasts draped across every billboard, every display, littering the sidewalk. Was offered Swedish love and French love, but no American love. American love like Coke and green glass bottles, they don't make it anymore. Thought about Moloch's story on Way to Cemetery. Could all be lies? Could all be part of revenge scheme planned during his decade behind bars? But if true, then what? Puzzling reference to an island, also to Dr. Manhattan. Might he be at risk in some way? So many questions. Never mind. Answer soon. Nothing is insoluble. Nothing is hopeless. Not while there's love.
So grew out of the politically shadowy landscape of the 1980s, when the Cold War was probably at its hottest in 20 or 30 years, and when nuclear destruction suddenly seemed a very real possibility. Watchmen used the cliches of the superhero format to try and discuss notions of power and responsibility in an increasingly complex world. We treated these fairly ridiculous superhuman characters as more human than super. We were using them as symbols of different kinds of ordinary human being rather than as different super beings. I think there were probably quite a few things about Watchmen which chimed well with the times. But to me, perhaps the most important was the actual storytelling, where the world that was presented didn't really hang together in terms of linear cause and effect, but was instead seen as some massively complex simultaneous event with connections made of coincidence and synchronicity. And I think that it was this worldview, if anything, that resonated with an audience that had realised that their previous view of the world was not adequate for the complexities of this scary and shadowy new world that we were entering into. I think that Watchmen, if it offered anything, offered new possibilities as to how we perceive the environment surrounding us and the interactions and relationships of the people within it.
Rorschach's Journal, October 12th, 1985. Dog carcass in alley this morning. Tired tread on burst stomach. This city is afraid of me. I have seen its true face. Streets are extended gutters, and the gutters are full of
blood, and when the drains finally scab over, all the vermin will drown. The accumulated filth of all their sex and murder will foam up about their waist, and all the whores and politicians will look up and shout, "Save us!" And I'll look down and whisper, "No." Stood in firelight, sweltering bloodstain on chest like map of violent new continent. Felt cleansed, felt dark planet turn under my feet, and knew what cats know that makes them scream like babies in the night. Looked at sky through smoke heavy with human fat, and God was not there. The cold, suffocating dark goes on forever, and we are alone. This rudderless world is not shaped by vague metaphysical forces. It is not God who kills the children, not fate that butchers them, or destiny that feeds them to the dogs. It's us. Only.
Well, this is what it looks like. This is real. Yesterday and today is the very first public unveiling in a public presentation of Project Looking Glass. A human being is about this tall. This is built in underground bases. It is colossal in size. And what happens is when you fire this thing up, these rings start going in all different directions. It shields off the barrel of water inside, which is just like your pineal gland. The water inside flips over into time-space, which then captures argon gas, captures visual images, and this is what it looks like. It becomes huge, glowing, all the way out to these posts, which are used as stabilizers for the energy field. Now, it doesn't start out with an image of the Earth. That's just there as a placeholder, although you could see the whole Earth like that if you wanted to. That's not usually what happens. Well, contact, right? We have been given the technology right in front of our faces in the movies. They just don't tell you what it's for. In what? 13 Ghosts? Well, thank you. I'll have to check that one out. Doesn't sound like a movie I'd want to see, but if it's for that, oh, I can imagine. So, Contact, just to recap from yesterday, blueprints come in from the Vegans, from Vega. They figure out that it's only when you fold up these patterns into a cube, which forms what there in the center, the triangle with the eye in the middle, as it folds up, cube geometry, that's when you can decode the plans to build this, these rings, which becomes this machine. And there's your little helicopter. So there's another shot of it. They got computer animations of how it's going to work with the different rings moving. This actually looks like the fisheye lens distortion effect that happens around the looking glass when you power it on. There's a gantry crane up at the top, and the little guy is dropped down and goes inside. That's like your barrel inside the mechanism there. And this is where all the action happens. This is where the Stargate opens, the wormhole into the higher realms. In this frame, we're seeing how the whole thing collapsed and fell apart. So, of course, you want to take a ride. You know, the new the new formation of the one after the old one breaks. And here we're seeing the new one. Once again, you get a very clear view, and there's your little eye with the rays coming off it, just like the all-seeing eye on the dollar. Not surprising. Here she is. It's even larger than the real one, standing on this ladder, looking down inside. This is the chamber and the chair inside, which we'll see is very important. And here's your geometry. Look at that. Did anybody notice that when you were watching the movie? Because it goes by pretty fast. That's that same geometry that's in the background radiation of the whole universe with the sphere in the center. They fire it up. Guess what happens? Big, bright luminosity, just like the real thing. The real thing that they're actually using and have been using since the 40s at least. And here's what it looked like from the control room. It gets brighter and brighter, and then she starts having the floor disappear. She gets dropped down inside, And then, of course, she goes through this wild wormhole ride, and there's an ascension experience at the end of the dream. The Iraq War had, to a large degree, the mission of capturing a looking glass technology that was dug up in Sumer, which was originally in the possession of Gaddafi in Libya, which is why they attacked Libya. Gaddafi got rid of it and gave it to Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein was using this technology, viewing the future. The U.S. government went in. Was at stake, because if they did not capture this technology and get it back and deconstruct it, that the Earth would have a pole shift. But when you actually decipher these letters, it means the doctrine of the convergent timeline paradox. Here's the problem. You look through time with this device, and when you hit 2012, everything goes perfectly white. As you get closer and closer to 2012, starting in around 1980, a very strange thing has been happening when they use the looking glass. There is an interlacing of images. So right now, imagine that if I had this, it was an image of like a face. And if I interlace them slowly, then maybe every second it goes from here to the face to here to the face. Then as it speeds up, it gets faster and faster to the point that if it were complex images, you couldn't make out one from the other because they're flip-flopping so fast. Okay? That's called interlacing, and the frequency of the interlacing gets higher and higher as you go towards 2012. So anytime that they try to look at, like, or they used to try to look because they're not using them anymore, 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012, bam! It's so interlaced that they have a whole server farm of computers just to deconstruct the two images and be able to see what they're looking at in the future. So again, this is what they're using. This is one of the main ones they're using, the Orion cube as they call it, or the cube. And also it's being used with looking glass. But what's going on with 2012? Well, here's another very interesting thing. We have multiple parallel futures that we can choose. And 2012 literally does represent create your own reality time. It has everything to do with what do you expect is going to happen. This is where thoughts becoming reality really takes on a whole new meaning in a way that you've never heard of before. So what they found that was so bizarre was that at December 21st, 2012, they could calculate it down to the day. That's how precise this was. That for some reason, all the graphs, all the waves would go into a complete flat line. They no longer moved up and down like before. They went flat for like 7 or 8 seconds. So then they're asking the guys that went through these stargates and were traveling into the future, what happened to you? Every single time that somebody tried to hit 2012, they said the same thing. There was this thing they called the bump. It actually hits you like a bump. You actually feel like you've slammed into something. And as soon as it slams into you, you have the most incredible religious experience you can imagine. Cosmic consciousness. Your consciousness just blasts into this wonderful place where you have awareness of no space, no time. All knowledge is available to you. Ecstatic God consciousness. You could be the galaxy. You could be a subatomic particle. You can go everywhere and do everything, and there's no sense of it ever ending. So when it finally stops, you just can't even believe that you're back to who you were before.
That's what happened to Jodie Foster.
Exactly what happens to Jodie Foster in Contact. So,
Is that the moment of no time?
that's the zero time, yeah. And Daniel doesn't agree with me on this, but I believe that 2012 is our zero time reference.
We saw an individual giving us a little presentation and a little bit of an explanation as to what the looking glass technology is exactly. And I don't share all of his thoughts and opinions, but pretty much what he was explaining was what Dr. Manhattan is from the Watchmen. Now, this is a very long article on Project Looking Glass that we're not going to read it in its entirety. We are just going to look a little bit at this first paragraph or two here. The following is a compilation of testimony provided by two prominent whistleblowers. Now, remember, no one blows whistles ain't meant to be heard, folks. Even whistles designed for dogs are heard by dogs, even if humans don't hear them. But Dan Burish and Bill Hamilton discussing the Looking Glass project. There's a wealth of information available regarding this topic, and it is probably one of the more well-known black budget time travel projects, with the exception of the Montauk project, which we featured 2 Saturdays ago as part of 2 weeks of tea, where we looked at the real life Stranger Things. So Stranger Things also has a little bit of roots in origin in reality, as does the Watchmen. But this will be kind of a lot of that was regarding the sort of 2012 prophecy and conspiracies and stuff then. But a little bit like Dr. Manhattan, it got to a point of time where he couldn't see anymore. And maybe if this technology was in the hands of industrialists rather than governments, maybe they might use it for their own nefarious purposes. So basically, Dr. Manhattan in The Watchmen was the Looking Glass technology and had, as we just discovered, those wonderful powers to go everywhere, be everywhere with anything he wanted, be a particle, be a solid rock, be huge, be small, be multiple people, be a singular person. All of that was what was part of being in Project Looking Glass explanation there. And also you mentioned the movie with Jodie Foster, Contact, but we're talking about The Watchmen. And as I said, The Watchmen was a comic book way before it's a movie that we're not going to touch upon today much at all, because it is so very different in the end game to that of its original source, the comic book, which is what I take as the source, obviously, of my reference and knowledge and information. I have watched the movie a couple of times. There's some great visuals, but they kind of spend a lot of time looking, paying attention to finer details and following closely in the early stage of the movie, and then sort of going off on its own tangent about 2/3 of the way through. But it's all about the 2012 sort of conspiracy, and we looked in a little video that we saw there. Will Cox, that was the individual's name, who I forgot, sorry about that, discusses how the Looking Glass device apparently resembles what is depicted in the film Contact, starring Jodie Foster. However, I'm using that as a point of reference to explain exactly what Dr. Manhattan is. And he has seen a number of subtle disclosures within movies, TV, and even video games using similar symbolic elements. Something in Reality Decoded 1985, we pointed out all the Tesla towers and stuff that were in the back of cartoons and movies and TV shows at the time. But that's a little bit there, as I said, of that. He was an inside whistleblower, former insider whistleblower. He talks a little bit about the pineal gland in the human body, a little bit more at length there, but we're not going to talk any much there at length, and it does go on a little bit about the remote view. Also, you can read that if you want. I'm running a little bit behind schedule, so I do want to go and just point out a couple of events that did happen in the 50s that could have been the real life Dr. Manhattan moment that gave birth to the Looking Glass technology. Stay tuned. Okay, so here we go. An event that took place in 59, America's worst nuclear meltdown, and this was an article from the 50-year anniversary a couple of years ago. But human error helped worsen a nuclear meltdown just outside Los Angeles, and now human inertia has stemmed the radioactive cleanup for half a century. Sorry, I don't know why I couldn't see that word. Interesting. John Trossman, a little bit like John Osterman, if you say it quickly, who became Dr. Manhattan. Now, they're saying this was at an atomic energy plant here, a nuclear power plant, but again, they would need to hide it behind some kind of disguise. Not going to say, hey, this is a secret time travel experimentation laboratory. And again, back in last year, there was all those power outages over in Southern California, where a lot of these sort of bases are, Laurel Canyon and all that, hidden away in the desert, out of sight, out of mind. Who knows what's getting on over there? Was that part of some of the stuff that we're seeing now? But during an inspection of fuel elements on the 26th of July at the sodium reactor experiment operated for the Atomic Energy Commission at Santa Susana, SS, California by Atomics International, a division of North American Aviation Inc., a a parted fuel element was observed. The fuel element damaged is not an indication of an unsafe reactor conditions. No release of radioactive materials to the plant or its environs occurred, and operating personnel were not exposed to harmful conditions, which was the case in Dr. Manhattan's situation. He was the only one that was affected by the accident of somewhat human error. He got locked into the reactor and thus got transformed into Manhattan. But in each case, all 7 tubes of the fuel element remained in core. This fuel loading, nearing the end of its useful life, was scheduled to be removed in the near future. This press release, issued 5 weeks after the end of the United States' worst nuclear reactor meltdown, was the public's first notification that something unusual had happened up on the Hill. For the next 20 years, it remained the only public notification about the accident at the Santa Susana Field Laboratory on a mountaintop in California. Maybe it's on a mountaintop to get sort of closer to the I don't know, better signal reception, stuff like that. Like they were in contact, they were at high and they had to drop it down, right? Or something like that. I can't remember. I have seen the movie, but not more than once. But in fact, from July 12th to July 26, 59, an unknown amount of radioactive gases were intentionally vented to prevent sodium reactor experimenting from overheating and explaining. Now, again, this is the official narrative. Were those radioactive gases the like what we saw with John Osterman transforming into Dr. Manhattan, that his first was a pair of eyes and a brain, and maybe his little brief appearance give off some toxic gases, if you feel and follow along what I'm saying. But unlike most conventional reactors that circulate water to be heated by the fuel rods in the core, in order to turn steam turbines, the SRE used sodium because it could operate under low pressure. Pure sodium, not to be confused with table salt or sodium chloride, was a risky metal to use since it catches fire when exposed to air and explodes when mixed with water. Interesting. Due to the experimental nature of the SRE, it was built without a containment structure. In the comic book, it was in a containment structure. He withstood his accident, and is this a little bit of sort of how this accident carried out? And do we really truly know? Because it was held secret, and there was only one statement saying that there was a leak. 5 weeks after the maths, that all the public was given to know. But we know there was a fuel meltdown, said William Taylor, and the current spokesman for the US Department of Energy. We don't know how much radiation or if any was released. According to the analysis of a 5-year study of a panel of independent scientists, they confirmed years after the incident of the SRE accidents, spit out up to 459 times the amount of radiation released during the 79 meltdown at 3 Mile Island. But anyway, that is it. We're not going to read it all, guys. But there was an event that took place in 1959, very similar, the America's worst nuclear meltdown. And was that the real life event that caused and created the United States government very own Dr. Manhattan, the Looking Glass Project. So let's go and look a little bit more now at the alien invasion and how that sort of fits into today's society before we do wrap this up. So there's a little bit about Project Looking Glass and Dr. Manhattan, and are they one and the same, or are these things connected? Who knows? Not saying they are, and just sort of pointing together the similarities of the Watchmen and the the comic book and some of the things that do exist or are alleged to exist in real life. Now, Dr. Manhattan does eventually leave Earth and go off to Mars, as we said, and here we are seeing a picture of the comic book from 1985. Let me just enlarge that a little bit for you there, and you can see the smiley face on Mars. Now, the comic book did indeed come out in 1986-87, and it was took place in the alternative 1985, which saw President Nixon in his fifth term in presidency. It also saw electric cars and genetically modified four-legged chickens, interestingly enough. But it also depicted this little scene of Dr. Manhattan on his little solitude up in Mars, sitting in a crater that looks like the smiley face that did in fact become the most notable and recognizable symbol connected to the Watchmen, along, I guess, with Rorschach's mask. But the very interesting thing about this is a crater, which we are going to look at now, if I can find it. There it is. Exists. That is actually on Mars itself. And I think we have another, there it is, two pictures taken allegedly from NASA telescopes. Again, we are led to believe what you want to believe with never a straight answer, but these are supposed to be from satellite pictures that were discovered on Mars. But here's the thing, they weren't discovered on Mars until 1993. So that was a little bit of an interesting wrap up to Dr. Manhattan, and a little bit of relevance at how it could indeed be somehow predicting us or preparing us from our reality, or giving us a shadowy foretelling of what's to come, if it managed to depict a smiley face crater on Mars 8 years before it was in fact discovered in reality that there is a smiley face. There it is from a little bit distant on the surface of Mars. Quite coincidental and quite cool, actually, if it is a real thing, but who knows. And there is another picture of the crater on Mars, and we will go back and look briefly again at the comic book. And there you go, that was the comic book from 1985, and these are real life, supposedly satellite pictures from 1993. And there you are, is another picture from the comic book for you, as is another one. That was a little bit about Dr. Manhattan, one of the pivotal characters in the story of The Watchmen. And here is another one, Adrian Veidt, that we can see looking at his multiple television screens. Now, funny enough, he decodes not only fiction, but what he sees being presented and broadcast on mainstream entertainment network channels, and he can sort of depict and decode as to what the networks are suggesting is going to be happening by the content and things they are broadcasting, preparing our minds, the subliminal messages and such forth. He looks at and can decode them a little bit like we can decode the fiction and predictive programming and such forth. And somehow how the elites always try to leave a little symbol or signal of their involvement in certain events that take place. But he is the mastermind behind the hoax alien invasion. He is the most wealthy man on the planet, and also the most intelligent man on the planet. And he amassed a huge amount of wealth and power as a result of his talents and skills and knowledge in education, and he was fascinated by Alexander the Great, which sort of led him to sort of have some kind of, not necessarily to rule the world, but to save the world from itself. And it is his manipulation and meddling that sort of created some fake news concerning Dr. Manhattan that sort of got him so upset and give up on Earth. And once this happened, then this is when the world fell into disruption and disarray and distress. And the distress was caused at the imminent nuclear destruction. Now, we're not exactly in contemporary times facing nuclear destruction, but we are in a period of distress and disruption with regard to the pandemic. in, there is a certain fear element involved with what is going on one way or another. If you buy into the fact that the virus is going to kill us all, then that is fearful. If you're somebody that believes that maybe it's a big lie and a hoax and the government are covering something up and using it as some other nefarious purpose, then there is reason to be fearful. But back in the Watchmen, the fear factor was the nuclear Armageddon that was impending. And just as, you know, people were about to start pressing buttons, Nixon was cutting his losses at what was going to be happening, because in the realms of the Watchmen, Nixon is in his 5th terms, and like, it's a huge thing. Again, when I started to do this, it didn't seem like it'd be such a monumental task, but there is so much, again, that is a very complex book that is contained in it. But I'm trying to sort of kind of concentrate primarily on sort of the sort of Project Looking Glass, all seeing, all knowing, and is this how the government really does truly know how to manipulate us? And Tavistock, Montauk, all these sort of things, are they all connected in, along with stuff like The Watchmen and Stranger Things and other contemporary in retrospect pieces of entertainment and fiction that do seem to have a striking contrast to realities. But as I said, it was the fear factor of nuclear Armageddon. We're in a fear factor now, and it's just at the point that all hell was about to break loose, civil unrest had sort of started to break out, that Adrian Veidt Ozymandias dumps his large squid upon Manhattan, killing 3 million people. And we did, if you can remember, hear how he did that exactly at the beginning of this presentation. So I won't repeat it again now, but basically it was very similar to Project Bluebeam in the sense that it was using sort of a fake alien hoaxed event, as well as some kind of electromagnetic frequency memory weaponry, which not only fried the brains of those in the immediate logistics and proximity to the teleported fake alien, but people in the surrounding areas that got caught in the blast were traumatized for years to come as a result of that psychic weaponry. Now, are they about to unravel and unleash this technology on us in our real time? Are we getting ready for the staged alien event? That's what you need to go back at this point in time, or maybe not in real time, but after this is finished, maybe go back and look at the previous 2 streams from this week on on Wednesday and Thursday, where we looked at the alien agenda, and then we looked at purple haze up in my brain. And as you can see there, Ozymandias is very purple in his color, and as I said before, he represents the global elites. That's why he is prominently purple and yellow, and it is with his the aftermath of his staged hoax alien event that the world does indeed disarm itself. They dismantle all their weaponry, and they do live in a somewhat forced safe security, but with a certain sense of unity and harmony, a little bit like Ronald Reagan was speaking about. But the whole mystery is kind of unraveled by Rorschach, which we will look a little bit now, and he is sort of probably everyone's anti-hero of the Watchmen, but it is his sort of investigations that somehow unravels the greater and more disturbing mystery of the staged alien event and the intentions of Adrian Veidt to bring in a peaceful, singular, harmonious world for us all to live in as a result of order from chaos in the sacrificing rather of 3 million New Yorkers. Now, the other thing that is also of interest, that this did foretell of a false flag event that took place on the 2nd of November, 2/11. Now, if you can think, 1/1 could represent the towers, and 2 towers come down on September 11th, 2001. That killed 3 100,000 people as a result. Was that a directed energy Project Bluebeam dummy run? Was that a little bit of the pages of the Watchmen coming to real life there? Global elites, militarized industrial complex at its work, using power and weapons and technology above our comprehension against us and passing it off as something else. And of course, in the aftermath of that, radical changes to the United States became rushed into legislation. And again, we are looking on a grand global scale on a false flag. Would this then be the event that would rush in radical changes and amendments to the way the global politics work? And would we see a one global governing body to prevent us from threats from out of this world? And that was what Adrian Veidt did successfully do within The Watchmen. And as I said, if you haven't read it, then you don't have to. The motion comic is available to watch on YouTube in its entirety, and the motion comic, unlike the movie, is an identical adaptation of the original literature written in the comic books. It then became a graphic novel. So here we are looking at the Watchman character. The blue guy there is Dr. Manhattan. This guy here is Ozymandias, Adrian Veidt, who we just looked at, the world's most intelligent and wealthy men. This is the Silk Spectre, who her mother was the previous Silk Spectre, and she was sort of forced into caped crusading and costume crime fighting. This is the Night Owl. He's a little bit like Batman. He's sort of got a Batman cave and some sort of gadgets and stuff. Has also got a little flying device named Archimedes, shortened to Archie. There's a really cool sort of like not spaceship but flying kind of craft that he gets around in. The guy in the beginning at the front there smoking the cigar is the comedian whose death in the outset of the Watchman is what lures Rorschach in to investigate the whole murder, because he kind of found this guy died, finds out that he was in fact the comedian, because all of these guys, although they wear masks and they are sort of crime fighters, they're not superheroes, they're just vigilantes, and many of them are like wealthy playboys that are just bored, that are sort of playing dress up and having role playing type adventures while fighting crime. Then no one, like, they don't have spider like abilities or adamantium claws or x-ray vision, anything like that. They're just normal human beings that have sort of a lot of money at their disposal, that they can kind of play superhero and vigilante. But the comedian, he was a government contractor. He was responsible for all sort of black op clandestine operations and projects overseas, including some stuff in Nicaragua, where he discovered himself by accident the secret island where Ozymandias was putting together all of his final stages for his hoax alien invasion. And it was like a mixture of people who, were special effects experts, movie script writers, scientists, professors, all sorts of wonderful and expert knowledge of their fields were put together, like the best of the best, creme de la creme think tank. They were taken off to this secret island, and on this secret island for years they kind of perfected and carried out all the processes and pieces of putting together this elaborate plan to stage a huge scale alien event on New York City. But the comedian does by accident discover this secret, and then it sends him a little bit insane, even though he was somebody that was kind of not against killing presidents or going in napalming and flame throwing children in Vietnamese villages and paddy fields. When he found out that they were going to kill 3 million people as a result of what was going on with the staged hoax alien event that was orchestrated by Adrian Veidt, Adrian Veidt then had him killed. In fact, he went and killed him, assassinated himself, throwing him out of the window. It was this murder that led Rorschach into the investigation, and he started to picture and think that this is a conspiracy. And he was a little bit concerned for himself because he is a masked crusader. And in the realms of the Watchmen in the 1970s, vigilantes, and in particular masked vigilantes, were outlawed, and it was against the crime, and all vigilantes were asked to hang up their masks, and some of them went public. However, Dr. Manhattan, government property, the most powerful being in the galaxy, was on the government retainer. Silk Spectre was his little bit of eye candy and asked to keep him happy when he needed to get his blue rocks off. And the comedian was kept on board on the payroll for black ops and clandestine assassinations, takeovers, such like that. But his death leads Rorschach to believe that maybe there is a conspiracy against masks, and they are out to kill all the former masked vigilante crime fighters. So he goes off and warns the Night Owl. He also warns Manhattan, but nobody, Dr. Manhattan, but he doesn't take him seriously. Neither does Night Owl. And it is only after a little while of persuasion and further investigation that suddenly the Night Owl discovers, wait a minute, there is something in this, and they start to believe Rorschach is onto something, and they further discover and investigate the story and the conspiracy at time, and lead it to Adrian Veidt as somehow being involved in all of this that was transpiring in the pages of the Watchmen, set in an alternative 1985. And as I said, go and watch it for yourself. It is such a great, wonderful, mesmerizing piece of animation, and it is so very, very close to the comic book. It really is like watching the comic book come to life, and I've watched it quite a few times over and over again. But they band together for one kind of little final adventure, over sort of look some of their differences and reasons that they kind of separated in the past. And they go to one last hurrah, and they find out that Adrian Veidt is hiding away in his secret solitude in Antarctica. Guys, we are going to be going to Antarctica next week. Hollow Earth, all of this stuff. Is it all connection? Do we have to just decipher all the pieces of fiction in order to put them together to tell the true reality that we live in, and not the alternative official narrative that we are passed off as our reality on mainstream news? Is this the real life? Is this just fantasy? And another thing, Dr. Manhattan could be considered or compared to would be the sentient world simulation. But you've seen how it all ends at the beginning. Spoiler alert if you do want to watch it, but find out how it all happens is part of the mystery and the enjoyment and entertainment that is the Watchmen. So that's me done and dusted talking, and I really could have talked for hours and hours and hours about this, and did sort of have to scrap a few things on the way towards production, because time, as always, does seem to be an essence. No matter how far ahead I get in the beginning of the week, I do seem to be running against deadlines when it does come to show night and production time. But anyway, guys, that was me talking about the Watchmen. In regards to real life, we will just finish up with saying that, we are in a very similar sort of stage of distress, not necessarily nuclear Armageddon, but is the Armageddon of the pathological kind, what is being force-fed down our throats via official narratives and controlled opposition. And is this the distraction that we are not paying attention to, the fact that so many outlets and organizations have been carrying out outer space activities, as well as shooting up a whole bunch of satellites and goodness knows whatever else into our solar system and atmosphere, as well as what is going on a land level in terms of electromagnetic frequencies, data, cellular device frequencies, Wi-Fi signals, 5G, mobile data, TV, radio, all of this stuff is polluting our air, and it is all unseen pollution. Are we being bombarded with mind control? Are we having our environment change dramatically? Is it as a result of polar shifts, gravitational pull stuff that we've heard of and mentioned in that guy talking about the looking glass technology? And as I said, are we about to witness our very own, similar to the Watchmen, false flag staged event, alien hoax invasion? Let's really hope not. We could do without 3 million people being killed, but there has been so much reports of UFOs in the last 7 or 8 months during a COVIDian era. Is this something that we need to pay a stronger amount of attention to and stop paying attention to what they want us to pay attention to in return regards to COVID-19? So Project Bluebeam, again, I'm not going to relay it about and talk too much about. We did mention that also in its relevance to what we see in the pages of the Watchmen, and I've got a shitload of content and hours of information on Project Bluebeam that you can go and watch after this if you want to. And I do recommend also paying attention to Wednesday's stream at time of recording, Alien Agenda, and then maybe follow up with Purple Haze if you haven't, because somehow, some way, I believe all this is connected. But we are going to look at a little documentary just so you won't be bored of listening to me rambling on, and maybe give you guys a break from the voice and give you something to watch. And we are going to listen to the artist and author once again in a little documentary all about the Watchmen, where they explain some more things about it better than I could. And again, it's kind of like getting the preachings from the preacher rather than the choir. So sit back, relax, and hopefully you will enjoy this before we return once again to the TSP Thrift Store studio.
Rorschach's Journal, October the 12th, 1985. Dog carcass in alley this morning. Tired tread on burst stomach. This city is afraid of me. I have seen its true face. The streets are extended gutters, and the gutters are full of blood, and when the drains finally scab over, all the vermin will drown. The accumulated filth of all their sex and murder will foam up about their waist, and all the whores and politicians will look up and shout, "Save us." And I'll look down and whisper, "No."
Rising anti-Semitism in Eastern Europe has voted the English only find 20,000 tons of oil with PCBs blew up the ozone layer today.
Standing by for solid rocket booster separation.
Greetings, prisoners of gravity. This is Commander Rick, gazing and grazing up and down the TV dial. On Monday, I caught an old Superman episode, and it was so naive. When they said, "Look, up in the sky, it's a bird, it's a plane," I thought, no, it's a hole in the ozone layer. There are no real superheroes. And if there were, would they be like Superman? As morally upright as a minister, as impartial as a judge, an all-American patriot? Or like Batman, a crusader for truth, wealthy enough to pay for his gadgets? Or would real superheroes be as pure and morally upright as Reverend Jimmy Swaggart, as impartial as Judge Thomas, as patriotic as Ollie North, a crusader like Geraldo, wealthy like Donald Trump? What type of person would enjoy undressing in phone booths? Think about it. Would you be happy if vigilantes in spandex zoomed around the streets in heavily armed hot rods and homemade jets, totally unsupervised by police commissions or civilian review boards? What would be the reality of superheroes? The answer is Watchmen. Watchmen is a comic. It ran 12 issues, 32 pages an issue. Writer Alan Moore and artist Dave Gibbons juxtaposed 1985 America and the comic concept of superheroes. But comparing Watchmen to the average superhero comic is like comparing Citizen Kane to Pretty Woman. Since it was published in 1986, I've become more and more convinced Watchmen is simply the best superhero comic ever. Alan Moore was already a legend in the comic world for his work on V for Vendetta and Swamp Thing. Dave Gibbons was known for his artwork on Road Trooper and Green Lantern. Together, Dave and Alan had created a short time travel story called Chrono Cops and a superb Superman annual. Watchmen opens with the world on the brink of war. Superheroes are outlawed, and an unknown assassin starts bumping them off. The story jumps from Manhattan to Mars, interweaving a global conspiracy with the intimate lives of a dozen distinct characters. And what compelling characters they are. Disturbed, lonely, outcast, vain, shy, abused. This week I talked with Alan and Dave, and from that Nancy has assembled this documentary. If you've read Watchmen, here's the story behind the story. If you haven't, prepare to have your preconceptions about comic books blown away. Roll it, Nancy. Alan, what themes did you want to explore with Watchmen?
Originally, there weren't really any themes. It was an idea for a more interesting than usual superhero book. Me and Dave Gibbons thought we'd like to work together, and we thought we'd probably end up doing a superhero book because it was doing it for DC and they do very little else. We discussed what sort of superhero book we could do. Originally, we were talking about nothing more important or serious than superheroes themselves, which don't have very much relevance to the real world. But we wanted to comment upon some of the traditions of the superhero book. That was more or less all we wanted to do, a revisionist superhero book.
Sorry to interrupt already, but I'd better introduce the cast of Watchmen. Dan Dryberg, a lonely kid who idolized a superhero named Night Owl. He grew up to be the new Night Owl and never really grew up. Rorschach, abused son of a prostitute, battles crime with a psychopathic rage. The comedian, machine gun-toting, right-wing super patriot, brutally murdered on page 1 of issue 1. Silk Spectre, pushed into crime fighting by her mom, a brassy dame who was the original Silk Spectre. Ozymandias, so smart he retired and became billionaire Adrian Veidt. Dr. Manhattan, the only Watchman with real superpowers. God exists, and he's an American. 6 lives, tied together by fate, love, paranoia, and fear. Dave, where did the idea for the various characters in Watchmen originate?
The Watchmen was originally going to be a revamping of the Charlton characters, who were a group of characters published by a rather small-scale publisher. Nothing on the size of DC or Marvel. DC had acquired the rights to the characters, and like all these sort of slightly clunky second-rate characters, you know, Alan and I both thought there was a lot of charm in doing something with them. And Alan came up with an idea that would use them, actually use them up, you know, because certain of them would die and wouldn't be available for sequels and things like that. DC rather balked at this prospect and said, well, could you come up with some more characters? And when we looked into that, it became clear that the characters did fall into certain archetypes, that there was the Superman, the only Superman in our world, Dr. Manhattan. There was the Batman, Green Hornet kind of figure who had a secret cave and a special ship, an owl ship that he could fly around in. There was the detective, there was the kind of down-at-heel Sam Spade character, carried rather to an extreme. And we discovered that what we actually had were archetypes that we could in fact explore the whole superhero mythos with.
The title Watchmen, like almost every aspect of the book, functions on a lot of different levels, but where did the name actually come from?
The origin of that is, I think it was a Roman writer called Juvenal, who said, I think it was when the Roman army was going to be away from Rome, the Roman soldiers said, well, what about our wives? And they said, oh, well, we'll get watchmen to watch them. And the question was, well, okay, but who watches the watchmen? And in a way, not in a way, really, in our book, the rest of humanity is suspicious and despises these over beings because they're frightened of what they can do. They don't like the secrecy. We show that indeed superheroes have, as it were, been banned by a Senate hearing. You know, that we don't want these masked vigilantes. They've been driven underground. So again, it's a slight twist because usually in comic books the heroes are applauded by the general public. They're the saviours of the general public. But we thought, well, maybe they wouldn't be. They'd be sort of admired but probably feared.
What started to happen was that around about issue 3, we started to notice that because of the way in which we were telling the story, that there were all sorts of other things, unexpected things happening within the work. There were certain political themes becoming apparent. More importantly, from my point of view, there were certain technical and stylistic things which were emerging. The way that we could almost cram subliminal information into the background of the panels by ways of little symbols and signs, just because Dave is an artist with the capacity to work in all of that detail clearly and legibly. And we found that somehow in that, the comics language, at least as I understood it, seemed to be evolving with each issue that we were doing. We were sensing new possibilities.
Really, the question that is posed by Watchmen is who makes the world? You know, who is responsible for the way the world is? And a lot of it is planning. But a lot of it is just sheer chance. There are patterns within this, the pattern that we perceive, but there are patterns going on underneath it, and that's what we tried to show with these almost subliminal patterns that go through things, echoes, repeated shapes, motifs turning up in unexpected places. I mean, the smiley face. I tried not to do it to the point of becoming facetious with drawing smiley faces, but there were things, for instance, we had these hydrants on the corner of the street that were things that you would plug your electric car into. So they had like a socket with two pinholes in it. And I must have drawn 100 of these until I suddenly realised that this circular depression with these two slits in it and the thickness of the depression was another smiley face.
Back in 1985, when you were creating Watchmen, the smiley face was already as passé as bell-bottoms. Why did you decide to resurrect that rather dated pop icon?
Well, the smiley face in Watchmen came about because Alan came up with a character called the Comedian, who was a comedian really in the sense of the Graham Greene novel, that he was somebody who messed other people up on behalf of the government. And I had to come up with some sort of visual image of the comedian. Now, you immediately think of the Joker. You think of somebody who's evil and nasty, who's got an insane grin. Well, that's been done. He also had to be a really kind of a burly guy. And I came up with this image of a sort of a very muscular Groucho Marx, because there seemed to be something about Groucho Marx that made me think of people like G. Gordon Liddy, you know, with moustaches, something about a moustache that makes a man look kind of interesting. And so I ended up with this very fearsome looking figure dressed in black leather, kind of like a Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., and that's a comics reference, but a kind of a super patriot, as it were,
right,
in kind of Arnold Schwarzenegger, black leather, you know, really imposing character. I thought, well, he's supposed to be a comedian, but he looks really fearful. He looked fearsome, not fearful. And I thought, how can we offset this? And I thought, I know, give him one of those little smiley face badges. And when we saw it drawn, and when we thought about it, it actually did symbolise the series, because it was the ultimate cartoon image. What the smiley face is, the origin of it, as I understand it, is that there were psychological tests done on infants, showing them different patterns and designs. And this was the least thing that an infant human would recognise as a human face and respond to. It would smile back at the face. So it's the ultimate cartoon. It's the ultimate linear simplification of reality. But the blood is reality intruding on it. Realistically rendered blood is reality intruding on it. And in a way, that's what we were doing. We were saying, well, what if we looked at comic book characters but said, well, what would really happen? And really, that's how the symbol came about. Again, completely fortuitously, and in a way that obviously I didn't foresee when I just drew this little yellow disc on the leather.
Originally, it was just a simple image that happened to be in the first issue. but which we found strangely compelling. There was something about that innocent yellow smiley face with that splash of blood across the eye. And I think that was something that other people found as well. It ended up as an emblem of the acid house music scene over here. And for a while I couldn't go out of the house without seeing all these jaundiced, grinning, stupid, bloodshot faces everywhere. I got quite sick of it. But it was a way of manipulating symbols and icons. To me, all comics, to a degree, are using that anyway. Comics is a form of shorthand. It boils down character and plot and event and story into its simplest possible form. It manipulates symbols, it manipulates cliches and images. And with Watchmen, I think we just tried to do that more consciously. We will be using images like the Rorschach block, the radiation symbol, the blood-spattered smiley, to evoke certain feelings. And to some degree, the whole of Watchmen was an experiment in the manipulation of the audience's sensibilities and sensations by an application of word and image, but done more thoroughly than I'd attempted it before.
You also seem to be manipulating the reader through the page setup. You either used a simple 9-panel grid or a variation of one. How did that very rigid structure affect the way you wrote the story?
It made it so clear and so easy and so streamlined. It was Dave's idea. Dave was harking back to Steve Ditko. Now, if you look at those very early Marvel comics, they have a large number of panels per page. 6, 9 panels. All in a very tight grid. There is none of this panels exploding beyond their borders, strangely shaped psychedelic panels, which are interesting and they're a novelty. But in the end, the shape of the panel should not be distracting from what's going on in the panel. It's the story that's happening in the panel that's important. And what we found working with that device was that, I think as Dave has mentioned in interviews, that it became eventually like the proscenium arch at a theatre. That or a television, you're looking at a television, the shape of the screen does not change, just like the shape of the proscenium arch doesn't change. And so you forget about it. You allow yourself to become totally absorbed into the imagery that's being shown within that rectangle.
Dave, I'd have thought that sticking to a simple 9-panel grid would limit you. How did you keep it interesting?
We used every trick we knew or had learned about how to tell stories in comic strip form. You know, the way you have a fixed viewpoint and a character advances towards you. The way that you keep the character constant, but you move the camera, as it were, around with him. Things like this. Things that actually had a graphic pattern to them as well, unlike a movie where it's a succession of moving images that, in fact, although they follow each other in time, compositionally speaking, they're not related to one another. On a comic page, you can make them compositionally related to one another. You can make an echo by framing a thing exactly the same as you did something earlier on, in a very controlled way, in a very obvious way, in a very deliberate way, that because you can compare the two pictures, you can stop and go back and compare, which you can't do in a movie. These resonances become very striking.
Also, in terms of control, it meant that I was able to lay out the pages visually and know exactly how much space I had for each image, you know, where the full page width images would fit best, you know, where you should use a run of small panels, where you should use bigger ones. I was able, more so than ever before, to have control over the visual flow of the narrative, which was great for me. I think you'll see in a lot of my other work since then, I've found that grid to be very useful, and I've used it repeatedly. It just seems to me to be a much more classic and direct form of comic storytelling.
For me, the grid also suggested a rhythm, like a ticking watch. Did you find that as well?
The grid did give it a rhythm, and it also, yes, it was a rhythm. And the interesting thing about a rhythm is that anything that breaks the rhythm becomes very conspicuous. I mean, normally in a comic book, a big picture, we're talking about 2/3 of a page or something. But in a page that's broken up into 9 fragments, even 2 of those put together appears a big picture. So we found that we actually had a range, that there was with the rhythm, there were the different beats that could go within that rhythm. And again, I mean, this was a great thing for Alan, because he could orchestrate it. He could say, da 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 da. If you that's a famous tune as well. But yeah, it did impose a structure, and the thing was about structure anyway. I mean, what Watchmen is about patterns and echoes and rhythms and things like this. So it all seemed to fit. It all seemed of a piece.
Sorry to interrupt again, but I got to show you an example of what Dave is talking about. Nancy, pump up issue 5, Fearful Symmetry. You'll see the first page mirrors the last page. The second page is an exact mirror of the second last. The third, and so on, all the way to the center spread. Watchmen is full of this kind of depth. I asked Alan if there was a moment when it all fell into place.
In issue 3, probably the very first panel, where the first panel in Watchmen number 3 is an intensely tight close-up of a radiation warning, the yellow and black radiation symbol. We're so close to it that all you can see are 3 black shapes, or 4 black shapes upon a yellow field. The dialogue coming from off panel is the dialogue of the news vendor who's saying, I think we ought to nuke Russia and let God sort it out. There's also a caption which relates to the pirate comic that the young boy in the street is reading, which talks about, I saw that black ship against the yellow Indies sky and knew again the smell of powder and men's brains and war. This apocalyptic little caption of horror and war and despair. And the actual panel that you're looking at, the black and yellow shapes, it does look sort of like the sails of a black ship coming towards you against a yellow sky. And I thought, this is great. We're linking this image of this black, awful hell ship with the approaching Armageddon. We're getting this resonance from the insensitivity of what the news vendor is saying with this very impassioned, poetic statement that's in the caption. There are all these little connections happening. There are all these things bouncing off of each other in this one very simple panel. And I think, yeah, that panel was when the light bulb came on above my head. That's when I thought, yeah, we could take this an awful lot further.
Of the 12 issues, which one is your favorite?
I very much like the Dr. Manhattan issue number 4. I like the structure of that. I like the way in which we played with a character who does not perceive time the same way that we do. We have a character who's post-Einsteinian, who seems to accept that all time is happening at once, past, present and future. And to him, the past is still there, and the future is there right now. And we tried to adapt that into comic storytelling to show his worldview. And there's something quite magical that happens in that issue. These little connections, it's quite heartbreaking at times. I was very pleased with that. These things happen by accident. I can't claim to have planned them. But you get these happy accidents where some little scene will be for no apparent reason very, very touching. So yeah, I think that was probably all around my favourite issue. Although, to counterbalance that, there is the Rorschach issue. The Abyss Also Gazes, in which I think in terms of Watchmen, that issue is where we actually go for the heart of darkness. We go to the very centre of this black, depressing sort of pre-nuclear worldview. That that had the ring of honesty about it. It was quite interesting when we were sending off the issues to DC. The first 3 or 4 that we sent off, as soon as they got the package, I'd get ecstatic phone calls from the editors and everybody concerned. It's like, oh, this latest issue, it's so good, it's so wonderful, we're really pleased with it. I sent off number 5, which was number 6, which was the Rorschach issue. And there was just dead silence. I thought, oh, maybe they didn't like it. But it turned out it was just that it was so horrifying and black that they were all stunned speechless. They did quite like it, but I gather that they just passed it round and everyone just stared at each other with, sort of bleak and haunted eyes and never said a word, which is about the best compliment that I could have received for it. So yeah, those 2 issues. Those are the ones that are my favourites.
I like the fact that you included a number of fairly recognizable characters, Nixon, Kissinger, Robert Redford. You didn't set Watchmen in a completely fabricated world like Gotham City.
No, we wanted to deal with recent events in real America. We wanted to deal with Vietnam, which is a thing, if I might be so bold as to say that I don't think America has quite dealt with itself yet. We posited a Vietnam where America won, because Dr. Manhattan won the war for them. He just made himself 60 feet high and strode through the paddy fields and trampled on the Viet Cong, which is basically what happened. So Vietnam, in our book, was a victory for the USA. So that again changes the complexion of things. Although I wouldn't say that it is a political book. It is a book that by necessity includes a rather skewed and different view of recent American politics.
It was very much an 80s story born out of that miasma of anxiety and unease that, as I remember, it was hanging over all of us then. The world seemed significantly closer to nuclear war. I think that's an illusion. I don't think we're any less danger of nuclear war at the moment. But back then, it seemed very, very present all the time, with sort of half-wits like Ronald Reagan saying the bombing starts in 10 minutes. You know, that didn't seem that funny to me, I must admit. Consequently, Watchmen was an attempt to come to terms with that unease. I mean, it drew some sort of, made some political points about power and the abuses of power. But I think my main intention was just to try and capture as accurately as possible the fear that I was feeling myself. I was feeling afraid for my children, for my family, for my friends, for myself, for my world. And articulating that was very difficult. I had to put myself through a bad couple of months to get close enough to that feeling, because it's so easy to hide away from it. It's such a terrible thing to think that the whole world could be gone in 4 minutes. I mean, I believe that that's the average. A missile launch from a submarine, it would be here in 6 minutes. No warning. The truth of our existence is that the missiles could be in the air now. And that has been the truth of our existence since I was born. How do you live with that? How do you live with that constant threat of annihilation? That was what Watchmen was trying to answer, and it meant me getting closer to those thoughts and those feelings, which I frankly tried to suppress most of the time. But for those months, I had to get very close to them and face them. I came away feeling a lot better. I came away feeling that I'd looked at it, that I'd got it in proportion, that I wasn't scared anymore.
It's almost 6 years later. What do you see as the legacy of Watchmen?
I think that I'd have to echo what David Bowie said about his influence. You know, this is the face that launched 1,000 pretensions. At the time, I hoped that Watchmen might show up a lot of the essential silliness and redundancy of the superhero genre. It wasn't meant as a revitalisation of the superhero. It was meant as a tombstone for the superhero, at least in my terms. I couldn't see any point in doing superheroes, from my point of view, after Watchmen. Unfortunately, everybody else could, and there have been an awful lot of bad Watchmen clones. Or not just specifically Watchmen clones, but this would extend to Dark Knight as well. People who were looking at those faintly grim and postmodern superhero comics of the mid-80s, and instead of moving on from there, have just recycled them again and again and again for the last 6 years. It's almost like, you know, postmodernism by numbers. You make a few references to William Burroughs, you make a few references to some currently popular band like R.E.M. that will impress your young readers with how hip you are. You throw in some garbled sort of sub-psychedelic philosophy. And you've got a modern comic. Doesn't matter whether it has any substance, doesn't matter whether it has any direction, but it hits enough of the right button so that people will recognise this as something modern and experimental and daring. And of course, it is not in the least bit experimental or daring. To me, the people who have taken the chances are not in the mainstream.
No.
The people who've taken the chances are the people like Chester Brown, the Hernandez brothers, Peter Bagg, Julie Doucette, all of those people. They are not getting big royalties for this summer's giant Batman crossover. But they are doing the work that is dangerous and radical and innovative. They're the ones who deserve the credit.
These are the comics that Alan Moore recommended. Peter Bagg's Hate, Yummy Fur from Toronto-based Chester Brown, the Hernandez brothers' Love and Rockets, and Dirty Plot from Montreal's Julie Doucette. All must have double bag items. Who will watch The Watchmen? Well, the comic has been optioned as a Hollywood movie, so maybe we'll all get to watch it. Batman screenwriter Sam Hamm wrote a script for Terry Gilliam in '88. Now I hear Danny Bilson and Paul DeMeo, who adapted the Rocketeer comic to the screen, are working on a new script. As for the cast, For Dr. Manhattan, they're thinking about Arnold. I'd cast Sting. For Dan Driver, the new Night Owl, Dan Aykroyd or John Lithgow. Silk Spectre, Demi Moore. Rorschach, Christopher Walken or Willem Dafoe. The comedian, Nick Nolte.
Soviet ships have violated the territorial waters.
Unforgettable. That's what you are.
Well, welcome back, guys. Hopefully you did enjoy that little introduction and little presentation on Watchmen Decoded. And if or not you found that interesting at all or not, we are about to find out. But anxiety has been growing for years, says Becky P. But there you go, guys. It is a very in-depth, it is a very deep story in particular, and it is much more than just a comic book. So that was it. And as I said, it could have been much longer, but time did get away with me, so there was a lot of things that I did miss out of that. And let's put the camera back on. Welcome. It was pretty good, huh? Thank you for that comment, Martha. And what did you find good about it is what we're going to find out now. Not just you, but the guys there, or if anything was good, or anything that did stand out in regards to what we may or may not be about to experience in our own reality. And you know, The Watchmen isn't the only piece of fiction. In fact, there is a little Easter egg at the very end of The Watchmen, which is a little ode to an episode of The Outer Limits. Now, some of you may be familiar with The Outer Limits, very similar sort of TV show to Twilight Zone. There you go. I was going to say Mission Impossible for some reason, but no, the Twilight Zone, very similar kind of almost X-Files-y of the day, mysteries and unexplained stories, one-off sort of presentations. But this one episode in particular was called The Architects of Fear, and at the end of The Watchmen, in the background on the TV, you can sort of hear the dialogue or read the dialogue of the presenter saying, "And welcome to Outer Limits. Here is today's episode, Architects of Fear." Now, Architects of Fear was an episode of The Outer Limits that was about a staged alien invasion, although not as elaborate as the staged alien invasion that we see depicted in The Watchmen, but it is a staged alien invasion nonetheless that was planned within this episode of The Outer Limits, and it was with a guy who managed to sort of manufacture and make a fake flying saucer UFO, and he hired an individual who was going to play the part of an alien. And the plan in this episode of The Outer Limits, Architects of Fear, sorry, I just had some Coca-Cola, baby P. But as I said, it was about a staged alien event, and the intention was to land this homemade UFO at the United Nations, and then the individual would get out of the spaceship and then hopefully, you know, achieve some kind of world peace. Very similar to the movie The Day That the Earth Stood Still, which was also referenced in The Watchmen, when a UFO comes and lands on Earth and warns the planet, said, "Listen, you know, we're from a superior race. We've come down, and unless you guys cut your shit out with the nuclear arms, you're going to destroy yourselves. And if you keep it up, we'll destroy you before you destroy yourself. So it's up to you, you know. Get your shit together, get rid of the weapons and the nukes, or we're going to destroy you before you destroy yourself eventually." And that is the only way you can get harmony. But that is a movie that is referenced in The Watchmen, as is this episode of The Architects of Fear, which was about an intended alien invasion. However, the individual, when it came to execute the plan, unlike Ozymandias, Adrian Veidt in The Watchmen, who successfully carried it out to the T and killed 3 million people, the guy in The Outer Limits got lost. He didn't make it to the United Nations offices in New York City. Again, New York City involved in that false flag alien event, and he got lost in the woods. He kind of crash landed in the woods, and eventually 3 hunters found him, hunted him, and eventually killed him, and then told the story that they found an alien, but they were 3 drunk hunters, so nobody believed them, so it kind of failed. there. But as I said, Bohos, thank you to see you. And again, my apologies if I did misconceive that you may or may not be a troll, but sometimes it's best to act and then come backwards afterwards. And glad you stuck around. Never thought codes would be in comics. Well, the trouble is, Bohos, that comics are a little bit less regulated than Hollywood. And whenever movies get adapted from comic books like V for Vendetta and The Watchmen, they get very, very watered down. And not so many people read comic books as go to the movies. And as Alan Moore was explaining there, that within these little panels, you get an awful lot of space to work with. And just how much space you can work with depends on what you can put in there. Now, there are an awful lot of references in that movie, or in that presentation. I kind of wanted to start putting all the references, the purple pyramids, the pale horse reference, the Day the Earth, but it becomes like monumental. And like, as much as I love The Watchmen, there's only so much you can kind of put into a 2-hour or in this case an hour and 20 presentation. But comic books aren't as regulated as Hollywood, and some of the stuff that makes it to print, and a lot of these guys that kind of do work within the comic book and geek sort of industry, they're all a little bit kind of, like us, a little bit conspiracy minded. And some of these conspiracies that they research a little bit like me, they sometimes write fiction about them to try and spread awareness in this, if or not you've got the eye and the attention to detail and the observations to look deeper than the story into what's going on in the story behind the story. You will discover there's an awful lot of fiction to be decoded in the realms of comic books. Comic books, graphic novels, exactly. Well, let's explain graphic novels in comic books and trade paperbacks for you. Let's get your geek on. Let's give you a little bit of geek education. Once upon a time, comic books were unable to be classed as literature because they got sold on newsstands mostly, and magazine racks in pharmacies and such forth, gas stations. They didn't get sold at bookstores, and therefore they were not eligible for any literacy awards. And I can't remember what comic book it was. It wasn't a very good comic book. It wasn't a comic book that was very popular or well known. But this one year, it actually won an award for best story. And I wish I should have found out what that comic book was. But the rest of the literacy world went fucking apeshit. How can a comic book? This isn't Shakespeare. This isn't fucking Hemingway. This isn't Jules Verne. This isn't H.G. Wells. This is comic books. And the award got revoked. But anyway, in order to combat that, the comic book industry come up with the idea of graphic novels. And what graphic novels are a collection of comic books. In the case of The Watchmen, it was a 12-issue series, so they combine all 12 issues into a graphic novel and change the name of issues to chapters. So now you've got a 12-chapter book that can be sold in a bookstore. Therefore, it is now eligible for literacy awards and is classed as literature because it's sold in bookstores. Now, a trade paperback is different to a graphic novel. A graphic novel is one complete storyline, like V for Vendetta. That is a one storyline. But many of the comic books like Batman, Superman, Spider-Man, the Avengers, X-Men, yada yada, whoop-de-whoop, they are a serialization. And again, in order for these comic books and these stories to be eligible for literacy awards, they're then categorized and cataloged chronologically. So issue 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 will be condensed into a trade paperback sold in bookstores. So there's a little bit about the difference between a graphic novel, a comic, and a trade paperback. But Watchmen is more kind of famous for being a graphic novel because of that was the kind of way it was presented, and it wasn't as a popular of comic when it was sold on the newsstands compared with some of the bigger titles at the time. X-Men, Spider-Man, there's big crossover events on both DC and on the Marvel side of the geekdom during the time that the Watchmen was published. And as it was kind of although it's produced by DC, it doesn't evolve itself in the DC world of Gotham and Metropolis. It does sort of exist within our reality, an alternative reality of our reality, where there were lots of characters and figures of notoriety. Nixon was used. Robert Redford also becomes a future president within the realms of the Watchmen. But it borrowed from reality, put that into the fiction, and then put a possible governmental secret conspiracy within the realms of that, which what makes it quite so mesmerizing. Now again, it took place in 1985. The comic book was released in 86, but it was written during 84 and 85, quite some times before that Tuesday in September we all know so well. And it does depict a false flag event in New York City on the 2nd of November. Now, 11/11 would be 2 1s, which 9/11 is something, again, we associate, the 2 1s. They often make the ones look like the tower. In the predictive programming example from The Simpsons, when Bart holds up the magazine, New York, $9, and he holds up the 2 $1 bills. It's represented as a 2. So a false flag event in New York that killed 3 million people in the realms of the Watchmen did have reference to the World Trade Center, and quite a few times within the Watchmen there are some of the panelings and picturing where you kind of see the towers in the background with a little bit of smoke coming out of them. And there is one scene in particular towards the end, just before the revelation of Adrian Veidt's master plan, and when he tells everybody what he did, and he didn't tell many people, it was on a need to know. The people that were constructing his fake alien thought they were working on a movie. The scientists that were working on the teleportation system thought they were doing scientific research. They had no idea or prior knowledge that they were part of a greater conspiracy. And once they had played their part, they were surplus to requirements and had been killed. Welcome, Lottie, late to the proceedings. But as I said, and I forgot what I was saying a little bit then. Somebody help me out if anybody was paying attention. Sometimes I wonder if or not you are. But the Watchmen, as I said, it has so much more than just that was it, the 9/11. But just before the revelation of his alien event that killed 3 million people in New York City, kind of walks out of his little garden at his secret lair down in Antarctica, and there's these 2 kind of like cinder blocks, very sort of similar to maybe the guide stones or the obelixes that we saw in Utah in Romania during the Alien Agenda episode. But he's got these 2 kind of stone columns that also could well be a representation of the 2 towers, and they're kind of crumbling and smoking. Now, Baby P, I did send you, I think, that little clip, because I was trying to get you a little bit interested and hope maybe you and Nancy may be able to get a couple of episodes in, so maybe you could pass on the reference, your opinion, and say, yeah, this actually is a pretty interesting story. And it is, if you kind of even take the conspiracy and are they decoding us, our future within the panels of the Watchmen or not, it is an enjoyable, entertaining story. And again, yeah, there was the episode of The Simpsons where Homer lost his car, if you remember. He got drunk with his buddies at the Moe's Tavern, and he ended up driving to New York, leaving his car at World Trade Plaza, and then he got a boot on it, and they went up and down. That actually episode got pulled from air for quite some time after. You wouldn't see that as a rerun. But the events of 9/11 were predicted, not just in movies and The Simpsons. In fact, they were actually predicted far more in comic books than they ever were in the sort of mainstream entertainment that the majority of people do, because although people are aware of comic books, not many people read them. And certainly something as an adult, whenever I would read comics in sort of public, or maybe I'd take a comic to a job or something and read on my break, I would be mocked and ridiculed. Oh, can't you read big boy books? Or don't you know how to read big words? Do you need your mum to read it to you? But there is so much more depth in stuff contained within the pages of not all comics, but a lot of them. They do have an awful lot of, intelligent, thought-provoking content. It's not all about spider webs and adamantium claws, right? And you'd be surprised how many movies and even TV shows in in the last sort of 20 years have originated from originally comic book stories or graphic novels. And there are hundreds and hundreds of conspiracies contained within comic books, something I spent an awful lot of time reading. But there was another also, let me see, I actually think I've got the picture here. Now another comic book hero of mine, Jack Kirby. Let me see if I can make this bigger. This was a comic that came out in 1948, I believe, and it was called Invasion from Outer Space. I don't know how well you can see it there. Look, does that work for you? Oh, I've got to try and figure out how to do it. Never mind, I'm just going to point at it. But you can kind of see here on this, it was from the 1940s, and it was written by an individual called Jack Kirby. Now I've actually got a Jack Kirby Silver Surfer tattoo on my arm. Big fan of Jack Kirby, loved his artwork. This story came out in the 40s in a comic book that also told of a false flag alien agenda, alien event. And now I don't know if you can read the words on the screen. How long are they going to stay there? Is it going to happen? And you can see there, is it going to happen? So you just kind of sort of hover these in this comic book. They just kind of hover around these fake spaceships. They don't actually have any weaponry or anything. Just the fact that they fly around scares the population into believing that there is going to be an alien invasion. But that was the title there, Invasion from Outer Space. But this was set in the 1940s that also depicts a staged alien event. So it's not just the Watchmen. It's been predicted quite an awful lot in comic books. What's going on? I've zoomed in far too much now. Hopefully some of you ladies that watch Alone Naked in the Night might sit on your phone at that particular part and set it to vibrate and give yourself a good time. That was a little bit of an extreme close-up, but the mouth there, that might do you ladies some I don't know, never mind, we're getting digressive there. But that is, as I said, another example of a staged alien event depicted within the realms of a comic book, but in the 1940s. And, you know, bear in mind, that's nearly like fucking 70, 80 years ago. 1940s, yeah, that would be 80 years. Am I correct? Help me out here, those that are better than maths. And indeed, Baby P. Jughead, funny enough, I've got a little comic there. If I can find it, yeah, here it is. I actually have a Jughead. I love Jughead. Oh, my mother's name is Jughead. That was a Police Academy reference, but I've got a very old beat-up Jughead digest there, and there's actually quite a lot of weird stuff like Jughead, you know, and not Jughead, Archie. He had like two girls running after him. One was a bit slutty and popular, one was meek and mild. But we're not going to do a Jughead and Archie comic book decoded episode for you. But comic books have been a big part of my life, as some of you may be aware. And as I said, there is an awful lot hidden within the 4-color fantasy panels that indulged and entertained me for many a night as a youngster growing up. Yeah, I don't know what it is about these little digests. They're like fucking 12 bucks now, these. They used to be like a couple of bucks a piece. You'd buy them on the counter. Now it's like, you know, $10 for a copy of Archie. That's why I don't collect comics. You just can't even afford them. And this was a little Marvel one I picked up. I'm trying to see if the price is on there somewhere. And this again was fucking $7. Can't find it anywhere. Absolutely ridiculous price. So you know, comic books used to be good. Something you could sort, you know, you had a couple of bucks, you could pick up a handful of them at the store. But now, you know, it's cheaper to do drugs than to read comic books. It really is. If you work out the price of a line of cocaine and the price of a comic book, cocaine is cheaper, line per issue. But hopefully, you guys, that did give you a little bit of an insight to the Watchmen. Maybe it might even encourage you to watch the Watchmen on YouTube. I did post a link in the Facebook group the other day, although not many people did comment on it. Although I think Michelle did. She had something to say that she can't watch superhero films. They give her headaches or something. But as I said, if you do get headaches watching superhero films, maybe don't watch it. But there is a loophole because they're not actually superheroes. They're just vigilantes. None of them have super abilities whatsoever. So maybe, look beyond it. And in the case of Rorschach, he was just a detective, as is Batman. Batman doesn't have the powers of a bat. He just wears a mask and has the wings because it's for superstitious purposes and to scare villains. But we're being scared in society right now. We're being spun a lie. Our reality is being augmented. And are we, with the evidence of what we've seen over the summer, where they seem to be pointing our eyes towards the sky in regards of UFOs and maybe even asteroids, because bear in mind you could also bring an asteroid into the equation. That could do a little bit for depopulation, but if or not that would be a constant perpetual threat, as opposed to an advanced race of aliens that could come back at a whim in their technology that is highly advanced above ours or not, that might not be such a long-term process, because HBO last year actually brought out a series based on the Watchmen that took place in real time. So it took place in 2019, but in the aftermath of the graphic novel and the story of the Watchmen, it took place in 1985. Now in that, Rorschach, the main character, he wrote a diary and he sent it to a National Enquirer type publication, who eventually published his diary in the aftermath in the fiction of the alien invasion, and they actually refer to it as 11/2, a little bit like we refer to 9/11. And there's even some support groups for people that were affected psychologically as a event of that false flag. But they make reference in the new televised series of The Watchmen about there is a conspiracy theory circle that believes that the events around the squid attack on New York was a governmental conspiracy, or somebody was involved. It was a cover-up. It wasn't exactly what it said, which kind of does give a little bit of a shout out to the 9/11 types that believe that there wasn't radicalized Islamic terrorists with box cutters that were the response and reason that the towers were brought down and turned to dust right in front of our eyes on live TV. But I'm going on and on, but we're getting to about the 2-hour 15 mark, so I am going to be wrapping this up very shortly at 2 hours 30. I'm a little tired. The battery is low. I did use it a lot today, playing catch up, trying to put together as much as I could for this little presentation on the Watchmen. None of you seem to have much to contribute or say on what you saw, so maybe that wasn't the best idea, maybe not the most enjoyable of these presentations there. The only comic I ever sat down and read with Mad Sax to Saxy. Yeah, well, I don't, I know the Mad comic, but I'm not aware of that issue. Was there any deep conspiracies rooted in the pages of that particular issue of Mad, or was it just for sexy pictures? But as I said, guys, didn't seem to be much input or anything to add on what you saw, and we are down to 9 folks, which is a bit disappointing. It is the weekend. Did think, maybe the Saturday night we might get a few more visitors to the thrift store, but as I said, the Watchmen isn't something that many people are aware of or is very recognizable to people, and certainly I'm sure a lot of people in a mainstream audience might not be too drawn towards it, because it is sort of a bit weird and wonderful in some ways. But again, time and time again on TSP TV, I've said watch the Watchmen. It will give you an insight in some information that will maybe help you prepare and formulate some of your own thoughts and opinions on the possibility of a staged alien agenda. And you can do so. In fact, if I can do it, let me go and get the playlist for you. I'll post it in the link, and then at your leisure you can then go and watch it. Like I say, they're like 20-30 minute episodes. There are 12 of them. And you can get through it in an evening if you want to do a bit of binge watching. Get yourself some snacks, some pizzas, and sit down and enjoy. So there you go. If you want to go in, drop over to that link I just posted, save it for you. Save it, to watch later on your YouTube, and go check it out. And maybe if some of you do go check it out, we can have a little bit of a further discussion about this later. But the battery is low. I don't really want to have the phone cut out like it did last time, although it is plugged in. It's one of those like weird cables. It sort of charges slower than or it uses battery faster than it charges, or charges slower than it uses. So it sort of charges 1% while it's draining 2%, if that makes sense. Yeah, that is very true. The Watchmen, that's the Watchtower though, I believe, isn't it? The Watchtower magazine. They used to come knocking at the door there. And this is why I've been telling you time and time again, guys, I can't really always spoon feed you. I can only sort of point you in the direction. But as I've said before, sometimes you can take horses to water, but can't make them drink. But hopefully it is new to you. It won't be unfamiliar now, Baby P. And maybe you will have a little bit of more knowledge going into it before you watch it, and maybe give you a little bit of eyes to be open to try and look for some of the clues and hidden messages yourself. And maybe having seen this, you might see them a little bit easier and more noticeable. As I said, purple monsters with one eye, purple pyramids, all the colors of the elite Ozymandias, ancient Egyptian hieroglyphic in architecture going on. Very, very interesting stuff. And as I said, I'm very disappointed that I lent my copy of The Watchmen to some girl who said she wanted to read it. But never mind. A very cult religion. Well, all religions, in my opinions, are a little bit cult-like, to be honest with you. But Jehovah's, Mormons, they're a little bit of the more bizarre people that try to claim that they follow the word of Christ. I will hide from them people. Well, we're all humans at the end of the day, and just because maybe they believe in something different to us doesn't necessarily make them the enemy. But they are, to be quite honest with you guys, you might want to start thinking about converting to Jehovah's Witness, to be honest with you, because they are exempt from their religion forbids them from receiving any medical attention or medication. So in the case that the government do start driving trucks around and forcing vaccines on you, maybe a loophole might be, hey, I'm a Jehovah's Witness, I'm not allowed in the eyes of my religion and faith to have your vaccine. I don't know if or not that helped, because again, the Jewish people were religious, if you remember, and they got sent off to detention centers and experimented on. Yes, Lottie, we do have a Discord still. If one of the mods wants to do that, it'll probably be Baby P. She's the Lynn of the crew. And those of you who paid attention to Knowing T, Knowing You during TSP TV 2 weeks of tea will know exactly what that's all about. But anyway, guys, eye open. Thank you, Baby P. As long as I've opened one set of eyes, then my work here is done. But we are going to start wrapping this up again towards the 2 hour 30 minute, although I did say that yesterday and we ended up going over 3 hours. But it is around that time of the week and the night where I would like to maybe sort of rest up, get a little bit of R&R before we finish off tomorrow. Not that link, the Discord, Baby P. Yeah, get a little bit of R&R before we come back and finish off the thrift store week tomorrow, where I have got very little to almost nothing planned for you. So what it will be tomorrow, we'll wait and see. It will be a little bit of a good job, Baby P. So I'll try and drink some Coca-Cola and see if I can burp for you as a little reward for your endeavours in continued service and pursuit in the field of excellence towards thrift storian protocols. it usually goes straight away. There you are. Baby P burps just for you. I think there was 3 there. Don't know what it is about Coca-Cola. Well, we're all getting out of here, Martha. So we're all going to go and say our goodbyes. You went alone. Although it's earlier there because you're on Central Time, right? 8 o'clock, so you're an hour behind. So it's only 10:30. I thought you were a party animal. 10:30 on a Saturday night. That's the time to get your skirt down, let your hair up, or the other way around. Smoke up a fat one, have a couple of shots, do a fat line off the back of your wrist and go out and party hard. Get your groove on till the early hours of dawn. But if you're a little bit like me, it's probably been years and years since you've done that. I can't even remember what it's like going out that time of night and getting your party and groove on a Saturday. Glynis is still here. Glad to see you're here, Glynis. Always happens. Somebody arrives. I know you've been here a while, but I just noticed the chat went up to 11. I'm sure it's the algorithm messing around with us. Funny enough, talking of algorithms, who wants to see how many subscribers we've lost this week? And in particular, yesterday. All right, so starting last Sunday, November the 29th, the final night of 2 weeks of tea. Does anybody want? It's a little bit like shitty cards, guys. Have a little guess how many subscribers we lost last Sunday. And bear in mind, they always only ever unsubscribe during the streams. I never get them. Baby P, that was an awesome one. No, it's a guessing game, Glynis. And this is what is very astonishing to me. And this is where I start seeing the patterns that never in the afternoon at 4 o'clock do I ever sort of, when I'm looking on my YouTube, which sometimes I do, I never ever see I get anyone unsubscribe, but usually during a show I will start on a certain amount. At the end I will always lose some. So anyway, any guesses? Have a guess. 4 from Baby P, 4 from Nancy, 2 4s, 12 from Glynis. Higher than Baby P and Nancy, lower than Glynis. That could be a good game, but I will show you just to be sure. It was 7, -7, and I don't know if you can see that. That is the last month. How many people? I looked that one day. Let's look at the one day I gained 1 subscriber. November the 15th. The day before, I think that was a day or 2 before we started 2 weeks of tea, but I gained 1 subscriber. Then the day we did start the tea, 16th of November, I lost 4. The next day we lost 2, I believe. But yeah, last week 7. And then on Thursday we lost 5, -5 on Thursday during the stream. They all coordinated a little bit, kind of like the radicalized Islamists that brought down the towers and hijacked planes. They all kind of got together, these little bit like the Gusset Girls. They're like coordinated. Okay guys, we're gonna unsub. Don't forget your Qurans and your bandanas. Have you got your box scudder? Okay, let's go in. Marfugal Akbar, Marfugal Akbar. Oh! And then they all unsubscribe. Okay, count 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Unsubscribe. There you go. Radicalized unsubscribers. I don't know if that's the thing. I was trying to be a little bit funny for you Saturday night. If not, that made you laugh. And yesterday we lost 3. So quite a lot and quite a pattern. In terms of the 4, Nancy and Baby P, you weren't very far away from that, because on Thursday, the November the 12th, we lost 4. Then on Saturday, November the 14th, we lost 4. And then guess what? On Monday, the 16th of November, we lost 4. On Friday, November the 20th, guess how many we lost that day? Get on there. Another 4. And then this week, it's been a little bit random, but we lost 2 on Thursday, 2 on Saturday, 7 on Sunday, 2 on Tuesday, 1 on Monday, 5 on Thursday, and 3 yesterday. And I'm almost certain if I look now, Let's see if we can do a real time. Yeah, we have actually lost. When I started today, it was on 4297. So we've already lost 3 subscribers tonight. Yeah, I said you were good at thinking the 4. So there you go. There's a little bit of what shadow banning looks like to you guys. So as I said, mine was 4 burps. Okay, you were counting the burps. I'll let you off, baby P. It's not a lie if we believe it, darling. So there you go. There's all the encouragement I get from YouTube, because of course I'm not monetized and I don't pay for YouTube premium service, which I did actually think that I might have to invest in, because then I can download videos rather than screen record. As accordingly, that might save me a little bit of time and effort, and then maybe they might give me some subscribers back. But at the minute, I'm of no use to YouTube and they hate me. What did I do with my Coke? Does anyone remember where I put it? I was going to drink some more, see if we could get some more burps in for you. But anyway, we are nearly at the 2-hour 30 mark. So without any further ado, I'm going to get my... unless you guys want to listen to the piano version of Life on Mars, and that's why I put Life on Mars in the intro, because Dr. Manhattan went up and lived on Mars. 5 burps. But you probably don't, so I just put the regular 1-minute outro on. Let's get rid of the camera. Camera is off, so we are getting ready to sign out, guys. So thanks for those of you who did tune in. I don't know what you're saying no to, Nancy. I've already told you you're not allowed to vote in these things. You're exempt. But as I said, guys, thank you for tuning in tonight, Saturday night at the thrift store, where we decoded The Watchmen for you. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully some of you will be a little encouraged and interested to go and watch it. And I'm sure some of you will just pretend that you're interested in it until next time, when we'll be talking to something else. And hopefully I don't bring up any questions about it. But anyway, guys, take care. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday. Don't turn it into a pumpkin if it is a little bit too late for you. We will be back tomorrow at 9 p.m. Eastern. Don't forget that. I do say that every night, but seemingly most people do forget that we start at 9 p.m. But thank you, Glynis, Nancy, Lottie, rather, Martha, what was that dude that was here that we thought was a troll? I've forgotten already. Boho, and that other Texan, another Texan we had to the, she went to walk a dog. I forgot girls' names, and usually when you pay them to be in your company, you can call them what you want. And I've never been very good at, maybe a pop quiz tomorrow would be a good idea to see who's been paying attention. Good thinking, baby Pamplin. So if you haven't watched all my previous streams in their entirety, now is the time to binge watch and cram, because there will be an exam tomorrow, and if you don't get 10 out of 10, you will be unwenched. See you tomorrow, Glynis. See you tomorrow, Becky P. Am I joking or am I serious? Tune in tomorrow to find out. 99% of you won't be brave enough, but share it and agree if you're in the 1%. Can I get an Asha? Copy and paste the bunny, guys, but change what it's holding. See you tomorrow night. TSP TV, Thrift Store Prepper, brought to you by Shit Video Productions. Until next time, take care, keep it thrifty, and be excellent to each other.